After the ceremony, I gave my dad one final gift. His hands were shaking when he opened it. The auditorium at Fort Benning buzzes with nervous energy and suppressed excitement. Rows of folding chairs hold families clutching cameras, tissues, and small American flags. It's commissioning day, the moment when college graduates transform into United States Army officers. After 12 grueling weeks at officer candidate school, Elena Martinez sits among her fellow candidates in the front rows, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. She's worked toward this moment for 3 years, ever since she made the decision that shattered her family's expectations. Elena scans the crowd, searching for familiar faces. Her mother Carmen waves from the middle section, wearing the navy blue dress she saves for special occasions. Beside her sits Sophia, Elena's younger sister, who drove down from Atlanta where she's finishing her medical residency. Miguel couldn't make it, too busy with quarterly reports at the family construction company, he'd said. But it's the figure in the back row that makes Elena's stomach tighten. Victor Martinez sits with his arms crossed, checking his phone with the deliberate movements of someone making a point. He's wearing his usual weekend uniform. Polo shirt, cacos, and the expensive watch that signals success to anyone who notices. Even from a distance, Elena can read his body language. The stiff shoulders, the way he keeps glancing at the exit, the occasional headshake when he looks toward the stage. Hey beautiful soul. Before we dive in, show some love with a like, tap subscribe, and tell me, where in this big beautiful world are you watching from? The ceremony begins with speeches about duty, honor, and service. Elena tries to focus on the words, but her attention keeps drifting to her father's obvious discomfort. When her name is called, she walks across the stage to receive her gold second lieutenant bars. Her hands are steady as the colonel pins them to her collar, but her heart pounds as she searches the crowd. Carmen is crying happy tears. Sophia beams with pride. Victor is looking at his phone. The real moment comes afterward, during the reception. Elena approaches her family in her crisp new dress blues, the bars on her shoulders still unfamiliar but meaningful. Carmen immediately pulls her into a fierce hug. I'm so proud of you, Mija, she whispers. Sophia takes photos, insisting on capturing every angle of Elena's transformation from college graduate to Army officer. Then Elena turns to her father. Victor looks her up and down with the same expression he uses when inspecting subcontractor work. Critical, unimpressed, finding flaws. The conversation around them gradually stops as other families sense tension. So this is what my daughter chose over a real career, Victor says, his voice carrying just far enough for nearby families to hear. Playing dress-up soldier instead of using that business degree I paid for. Elena feels the heat rise in her cheeks, but she keeps her voice steady. Dad, this is my career. I'm an officer in the United States Army. Victor's laugh has an edge that cuts through the celebratory atmosphere. You think this uniform makes you tough? You were always the weak one, Elena. Always running from real responsibility. He gestures toward her uniform dismissively. This is just another way to avoid growing up and making real decisions. Carmen steps between them. Victor, please. This is Elena's day. This is exactly the problem, Victor continues, his voice rising slightly. Everyone wants to coddle her instead of telling her the truth. The military is where people go when they can't make it in the real world, when they need someone else to tell them what to do every day. Elena watches other families pretend not to listen while clearly absorbing every word. She sees a fellow new lieutenant's parents exchange uncomfortable glances. The photographer who is capturing happy family moments quietly moves away. I need to get going, Victor announces, checking his watch with theatrical precision. Some of us have actual work tomorrow. He turns to Carmen. Are you coming? Or are you staying here for more of this? Carmen looks torn between her husband and daughter, caught in a loyalty trap that Elena recognizes from years of family dynamics. Sophia squeezes Elena's arm, but even she seems uncertain about how to navigate the moment. "Go with him, Mom," Elena says quietly. "It's fine." The aftermath is captured in what should have been a celebration photo. Elena stands in her dress blues, bars gleaming on her shoulders, while her father walks toward the exit. Carmen hesitates for a moment, then follows Victor, leaving Elena with Sophia and a handful of other new officers whose families have welcomed her into their celebrations. Later, as Elena packs her belongings to report to her first duty station, she stares at the official commissioning photo. 24 new second lieutenants stand in perfect formation, representing months of training, sacrifice, and dedication. But all she can think about is her father's words. "You were always the weak one." The event that sparks everything isn't just a public humiliation. It's the moment Elena realizes she'll have to choose between seeking her father's approval and building her own version of strength. Standing in that reception hall, watching Victor walk away from her greatest achievement, Elena makes a decision that will shape everything that follows. She chooses herself. 6 months after commissioning, Elena comes home for the family's annual 4th of July barbecue. It's a Martinez family tradition that's grown over the years from a simple backyard gathering to a neighborhood event. Victor takes pride in hosting what he calls the best party on the block, complete with a professional-grade grill, a fully stocked bar, and enough food to feed half the subdivision. Elena arrives in civilian clothes, jeans and a simple red top, hoping to blend in and avoid making her military service the center of attention. She's been stationed at Fort Gordon, working in military intelligence, but she's learned to keep those details to herself. The last thing she wants is another confrontation with her father in front of extended family. But Victor has other plans. "Look who decided to show up," Victor announces as Elena walks into the backyard where 30-plus relatives, neighbors, and business associates are already gathering. "My daughter, the soldier." The way he says soldier makes it sound like a consolation prize. Elena hugs her cousins and aunts, trying to steer conversations toward safe topics: Sophia's residency, Miguel's latest construction projects, her cousin Maria's new baby. For a brief moment, she thinks she might make it through the evening without incident. Then Victor starts holding court near the grill, and Elena becomes his favorite topic. "You know, I keep telling people about Elena's little adventure," he says to a circle of neighbors and business partners, his voice carrying across the patio. "My daughter couldn't handle the real world, so she ran off to play army." He flips burgers with theatrical flair, playing to his audience. "I spent $40,000 on her business degree, and what does she do? Decides she needs Uncle Sam to tell her what to do every day." Elena feels every conversation around her pause. Cousin Danny shoots her a sympathetic look, but doesn't speak up. Her Aunt Lisa suddenly becomes very interested in arranging potato salad. The neighbors who don't know the family well exchange uncomfortable glances. "At least she's getting paid to exercise," adds Tom Rodriguez, Victor's longtime business partner, clearly trying to keep the mood light. "Barely," Victor laughs. "You know what a second lieutenant makes? Less than I pay my newest apprentice electrician. And he's building something that matters, not playing dress-up in the woods." Elena's face burns, but she stays quiet, helping her mother arrange desserts on the kitchen counter. Through the window, she watches Miguel laugh along with his father's jokes, nodding when Victor gestures toward the house where Elena is clearly visible. "The funny thing is," Victor continues, warming to his theme, "Elena always needed someone else to solve her problems. Remember when she was little and couldn't ride a bike? Carmen had to hold the seat for months. High school math? Needed a tutor. Choosing a college major? Had to call her guidance counselor 3 times a week." He takes a long drink of beer. "So I guess the military makes sense. Finally found somewhere that'll hold her hand through everything." The comment hits Elena like a physical blow. She remembers learning to ride that bike, how Victor had walked away in frustration when she wobbled, leaving her mother to provide the encouragement and patience. She remembers struggling with calculus, how Victor's response was always figure it out, while Carmen drove her to tutoring sessions. Elena notices her grandfather, Abuelo Roberto, sitting in his lawn chair near the back fence. He's the only Korean War veteran at the party, and Victor's comments clearly bother him. When Elena catches his eye, he shakes his head sadly and gets up to go inside. Elena's problem, Victor continues, gesturing with his spatula for emphasis, is she never learned that life isn't about finding yourself or following your passion. It's about building something real, something that lasts. This military thing, she'll be back in 2 years when she realizes they don't coddle weak people the way college did. Dad. Sophia appears at Elena's elbow, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. Maybe we could talk about something else? What? I'm just being honest, Victor says, his voice carrying that edge Elena knows means he's committed to his position. Everyone wants to pretend this was a smart choice instead of telling her the truth. Elena's always been the sensitive one, always needed extra encouragement. The military eats people like that alive. Elena watches her extended family's reactions. Uncle Carlos studies his shoes. Aunt Rosa suddenly remembers she needs to check on her kids in the pool. The neighbors who came for a fun barbecue are now witnessing a family dynamic they clearly wish they could escape. You know what really gets me? Victor says, hitting his stride. I built this company from nothing. 42 years of real work, creating jobs, building things people actually need. And my own daughter thinks playing soldier is more important than helping build a family legacy. Elena realizes that Miguel is nodding along, that several family members are listening without objection, that Victor is successfully reframing her military service as selfish abandonment rather than honorable service. She's being erased from the family narrative in real time, transformed from accomplished officer to disappointing daughter who chose wrong. The worst part isn't Victor's words. It's the silence from everyone else. Elena stands in her childhood home, surrounded by people who've known her entire life, and realizes she's completely alone in defending her choice to serve her country. When Abuelo Roberto doesn't return from inside, Elena quietly follows him. She finds him sitting on the front porch steps, staring at the flag hanging from their mailbox. I'm sorry you had to hear that, Abuelo. The old man looks at her with eyes that have seen too much. Your father doesn't understand what service means, Mija, but that doesn't make your choice wrong. It's the only validation Elena receives that entire evening. As the party continues in the backyard, she sits with her grandfather on the front steps, both of them exiled from a celebration that has no room for their kind of strength. Sitting on that front porch with her grandfather, Elena's mind drifts back to when she was 16. It was a different 4th of July, 8 years earlier, and the Martinez family was hosting their usual barbecue. But that night had ended very differently. Elena remembers being awakened at 2 in the morning by sounds from the living room, muffled crying and her grandfather's voice, shaky and desperate. She'd crept downstairs to find Abuelo Roberto sitting on the couch in his pajamas, tears streaming down his weathered face. He was holding an old photograph of men in army uniforms, his hands trembling as he stared at faces from another lifetime. They're all gone, he kept repeating. Jimmy, Carlos, Michael, they're all gone and I couldn't save them. Elena had sat beside him, not knowing what to say but understanding instinctively that her grandfather was reliving something terrible. He told her about Korea, about watching his best friend die in his arms, about the nightmares that still came 40 years later. He spoke about brotherhood, about men who would die for each other, about a kind of loyalty and sacrifice that most people would never understand. Service isn't about glory, Mija, he'd whispered that night. It's about standing up when others can't. It's about being strong for people who need protecting. The next morning, Elena had asked her father about her grandfather's war stories. Victor's response was swift and dismissive. "That military garbage poisoned your grandfather's mind," he'd said, not looking up from his newspaper. 40 years later, and he's still crying about ancient history. That's what happens when you let other people's problems become your problems. Elena had pressed further, asking why they never talked about Abuelo Roberto's service, why there were no pictures of him in uniform displayed in their house like some of their neighbors had. Because dwelling on the past doesn't build the future, Victor had snapped. Your grandfather could have done something with his life after the war. Instead, he came back broken and spent 30 years working in a factory because he couldn't handle the pressure of real responsibility. That conversation had planted a seed, but it was what happened later that summer that really opened Elena's eyes. Elena had been working her mandatory summer internship at Martinez Construction, filing papers and fetching coffee. She'd overheard Victor on a phone call with a city contractor about a veteran housing development project. "Look, these guys want premium materials for discount prices," Victor had laughed into the phone. "They think because it's for veterans we should work for free. But business is business. We use the cheapest materials that pass inspection, bill for the premium stuff, and everybody wins." Elena had watched through the office window as Victor gestured dismissively while talking about bleeding heart liberals who think we owe something to every sad sack who couldn't make it in civilian life. When the call ended, Elena had mustered the courage to speak up. "Dad, shouldn't we want to do good work for veterans? Abuelo always says." "Your grandfather says a lot of things," Victor had interrupted. "And look where it got him. 40 years of nightmares and a pension that barely covers his medication. You want to end up like that?" Victor had leaned back in his chair, studying his teenage daughter with the same calculating look he used when pricing a job. "Elena, you're going to learn something important about this world. There are two kinds of people. Those who build things that matter, and those who spend their lives serving other people's dreams. Your grandfather chose service. I chose success. Which one of us is better off?" That afternoon, Elena had suggested they could do better work on the veteran housing project, maybe even donate some premium materials as a gesture of respect for people like her grandfather. Victor's laugh had been cold. "You don't understand business, sweetheart. Bleeding hearts don't build empires. You think those veterans care about gratitude? They just want someone else to solve their problems, just like they did in the military." He'd stood up and walked to the window overlooking the construction site. "You know what your problem is, Elena? You're too much like your grandfather. Too soft. Too worried about everyone else's feelings. That's fine for a teenage girl, but it's not going to work in the real world." That night, Elena had found her grandfather in his workshop behind the house, carefully maintaining the few military items he'd kept. His dog tags, a faded photo of his unit, a medal he never talked about. When she asked him about service and sacrifice, he'd looked at her with eyes that carried decades of quiet dignity. "Your father thinks strength means taking what you want," Abuelo Roberto had said. "But real strength, Mija, is protecting what matters, even when it costs you something." Elena had gone to bed that night understanding something fundamental about her family. Victor measured worth by accumulation, money, power, control. But her grandfather had measured it by contribution, service, sacrifice, putting others first. Years later, sitting on the front porch after another barbecue where Victor had dismissed her military service, Elena realized that the divide in her family had been building for decades. Victor didn't just disapprove of her career choice. He fundamentally rejected the values that choice represented. She wasn't just choosing the military over the family business. She was choosing her grandfather's definition of strength over her father's. And Victor couldn't forgive her for that betrayal. 3 months into Elena's first deployment to a forward operating base in Eastern Europe, Victor has perfected his version of Elena's military story. And it's completely fabricated. At his weekly poker game with business associates, Victor holds court with his usual confidence. You know, Elena's been shipped off to some cushy desk job in Germany, he says, dealing cards with practiced ease. Probably never left the base. That's how these military assignments work for people like her. All the benefits, none of the real risk. The truth is that Elena is working 16-hour days in a joint intelligence operation, analyzing threat patterns that could save hundreds of civilian lives. But Victor doesn't know this because Elena stopped sharing details about her work months ago. Her silence has given him the freedom to create whatever narrative serves his purposes. At the next family gathering, Miguel's birthday dinner, Victor's storytelling reaches new heights. The funny thing about Elena's military career, he announces to the table full of cousins and aunts, is that it's exactly what I predicted. She needed somewhere that would give her structure, because she couldn't handle making real decisions. Carmen tries to redirect the conversation, but Victor is just getting started. You have to understand Elena's personality, he continues, cutting his steak with deliberate precision. She's always been the type who needs someone to tell her what to do. Remember high school? She couldn't pick a college major without calling that guidance counselor every week. Uncle Carlos nods politely, though Elena's cousin Maria looks uncomfortable. Sophia stares at her plate, clearly struggling with whether to speak up. The military is perfect for people like that, Victor continues. Wake up at this time, eat this food, wear this uniform, go to this meeting. No thinking required. Just follow orders and collect a paycheck. What makes Victor's narrative so insidious is how he weaves in just enough truth to make it believable. Elena did struggle with choosing a college major. She did call her guidance counselor frequently, but Victor transforms normal teenage uncertainty into evidence of fundamental weakness. The best part, Victor says, warming to his theme, is that Elena thinks she's being independent. She calls it serving her country, but really she's just found the ultimate authority figure. Instead of Dad telling her what to do, now it's Uncle Sam. Miguel laughs appreciatively. At least someone else is dealing with her drama now. Exactly, Victor says. Carmen used to worry about Elena making bad decisions, but now we don't have to. The military will keep her in line, give her 3 meals a day, and make sure she shows up on time. It's like adult daycare. The family laughs, and Elena's absence makes her an easy target. No one challenges Victor's characterization because Elena isn't there to defend herself. And her silence about her actual work makes it impossible for Carmen to correct the record. At his construction office, Victor's story evolves further. My daughter joined the military because she couldn't cut it in the real world, he tells potential clients, using Elena's choice as an example of his own superior judgment. I tried to teach her about business, but she didn't have the stomach for real competition. Some people are just followers, you know? To his employees, Victor presents Elena's military service as a cautionary tale. This is what happens when you don't appreciate opportunities, he says during a crew meeting. I offered my daughter a chance to learn a real trade, to be part of building something that matters. Instead, she chose to be another cog in the government machine. The most damaging part of Victor's narrative isn't just what he says about Elena. It's what he says about her relationship with the family. Carmen's embarrassed, obviously, he tells his poker buddies. 40 years of raising kids, and one of them ends up playing soldier instead of contributing to society. It breaks her heart, but she's too nice to say anything. This is completely false. Carmen writes Elena letters every week expressing pride in her service and asking about her work. But Victor's version serves his purposes. It positions him as the realistic parent who saw Elena's limitations, while Carmen is the enabler who couldn't face the truth. At Sophia's medical school graduation party, Victor's narrative reaches its peak refinement. Elena wanted to come, but you know how it is with military schedules, he tells relatives, implying that Elena's absence is due to inflexibility rather than active deployment. Besides, she's probably embarrassed. Here's Sophia becoming a doctor, contributing to society, while Elena's still figuring out what she wants to be when she grows up. The cruelest part is how Victor uses Elena's own character against her. Her humility becomes evidence that she knows she's failed. Her professionalism becomes proof that she's been trained to suppress her personality. Her dedication to her work becomes evidence that she has nothing else in her life worth talking about. By the time Elena returns from her first deployment, Victor's version of her story has become family gospel. She's the daughter who couldn't handle real responsibility, who needed the military to provide structure she couldn't create herself, who chose easy government work over the challenge of building something meaningful. The narrative is so complete, so consistently reinforced, that even Elena sometimes wonders if there's truth in it. When you're told something often enough by people who claim to love you, it becomes hard to trust your own experience. But what Victor doesn't know is that while he's been crafting his comfortable fiction, Elena has been building something real, something that will eventually make his false narrative impossible to maintain. Elena's transformation doesn't happen overnight. It begins with a single phone call home after her first major intelligence briefing. A call where she's bursting to share that her analysis helped prevent a terrorist attack on a civilian marketplace. But when Victor answers the phone, his first words are, "Please tell me you're finally ready to come home and do something useful with your life." That's the moment Elena realizes that no amount of achievement will change her father's narrative. So she stops trying. The shift is subtle at first. When Carmen calls asking about Elena's work, Elena's responses become carefully neutral. "It's going well, Mom. I'm learning a lot." When pressed for details, Elena deflects. "Most of what I do is classified, but I'm staying busy." She stops mentioning promotions, commendations, or challenging assignments. Her family begins to interpret this professional discretion as proof that there's nothing worth mentioning. Elena's phone calls home become shorter and less frequent. Where she once called twice a week, trying to maintain family connections despite the distance, she now calls every 2 weeks, then monthly. When Victor answers, their conversations are polite but hollow. "How's the military treating you?" Victor asks during one call, his tone suggesting he expects complaints. "Fine, Dad. Everything's fine. Still doing that computer work? Intelligence analysis, yes. Well, at least you're staying out of trouble." Elena doesn't tell him that she's been selected for advanced training, or that her commanding officer called her analysis exceptional, or that she's being considered for a position that would put her on track for major by age 30. She certainly doesn't mention that she's thriving in an environment that rewards competence over politics, merit over family connections. The most telling change comes when Sophia's engagement party approaches. Elena has leave scheduled and could easily attend, but she finds herself making excuses. "I'm not sure about the dates," she tells Carmen. "My schedule is pretty unpredictable right now." The truth is that Elena can't bear another family gathering where Victor will perform his disappointed father routine for an audience of relatives and family friends. She can't sit through another evening of being the cautionary tale, the daughter who chose poorly, the example of what happens when you don't listen to your parents. Instead, Elena throws herself into her work with an intensity that her colleagues notice. She volunteers for additional training, takes on extra assignments, and studies military strategy during her off hours. Where other junior officers spend weekends socializing or video chatting with family, Elena is usually found in the base library or running training scenarios. "Martinez, you sure you don't want to come to the barbecue tonight?" asks Lieutenant Jackson, one of her fellow intelligence officers. "You've been working 16-hour days all week." "I'm good," Elena responds, not looking up from her analysis. This stuff is actually interesting. It's not that Elena becomes antisocial. She develops strong friendships with her fellow officers and builds a reputation as someone you can count on in a crisis. But her social energy is entirely directed toward people who understand and value her work. She stops trying to bridge the gap between her military life and her family life because the effort is exhausting and pointless. Elena's commanding officer, Major Patricia Reynolds, notices the change during their quarterly review. "Martinez, your performance has been outstanding, but I want to make sure you're maintaining balance. When's the last time you took real leave?" "I prefer to stay busy, ma'am. Keeps me sharp." Major Reynolds studies Elena's file. "Your family doesn't visit much. They're not really the military type, ma'am." It's the closest Elena comes to explaining the situation, and Major Reynolds, who's dealt with similar family dynamics in her own career, understands immediately. "Well, for what it's worth, you're developing into one of the finest young officers I've supervised. Some people take years to find their calling. You seem to have found yours." That conversation stays with Elena. While her father sees her silence as evidence of shame or failure, Elena is actually discovering something profound. She doesn't need Victor's approval to build a meaningful career. The validation she once sought from family is now coming from peers and supervisors who judge her by her performance, not her compliance with their expectations. Elena's letters home become brief and factual. "I'm doing well. Work is challenging but rewarding. I hope everyone is healthy." She stops asking about the family business, stops inquiring about Victor's projects, stops trying to find common ground for conversation. When Miguel calls to complain that Elena is acting weird and barely talks to anyone anymore, Elena simply says, "I'm focused on my career right now. I hope you understand." What Elena's family doesn't realize is that her withdrawal isn't defeat. It's strategy. She's stopped trying to convince people who are determined to misunderstand her and started building relationships with people who see her clearly. While Victor interprets her silence as proof that she's finally ashamed of her choices, Elena is actually becoming someone extraordinary. She's learning that sometimes the most powerful response to people who diminish you is to simply leave. Not dramatically, not with threats or ultimatums, but quietly and completely. Elena is building a life where Victor's opinion becomes irrelevant, because she's surrounded by people whose respect actually means something. The silence Victor thinks represents Elena's surrender is actually the sound of his daughter outgrowing the need for his approval. Elena's methodical documentation begins almost by accident. After receiving her first Army Commendation Medal for preventing a security breach that could have compromised 3 Allied operations, she takes a photo of the award citation and sends it to her mother. Carmen's response is immediate and proud, but when Elena asks if she shared the news with Victor, Carmen's silence tells her everything. That night, Elena starts what she'll later call her clarity file. It begins with a simple folder on her laptop labeled Career Documentation, standard practice for any military officer tracking their professional development. But Elena's file becomes something more comprehensive. She meticulously documents every achievement, every piece of recognition, every instance where her work makes a tangible difference. The commendations pile up steadily. Elena saves the citation for her Army Achievement Medal, awarded after her intelligence analysis identifies and neutralizes a human trafficking network. She screenshots the email from her commanding officer praising her exceptional analytical skills and dedication to mission success. When she's selected to brief senior leadership on emerging threat patterns, Elena saves the official invitation and takes a photo of herself presenting to a room full of colonels and generals. But Elena also documents the other side of her story. She saves every dismissive text message from her father, every family photo where she's conspicuously absent, every second-hand report of Victor's comments about her failed military career. She creates a timeline that shows the stark contrast between her actual achievements and her family's perception of them. The most damning evidence comes from Sophia, who calls Elena after another family dinner where Victor held court about his daughter's poor choices. "Elena, I need to tell you what Dad said tonight," Sophia begins hesitantly. He told everyone that you're basically doing clerical work, and that your commanding officer called him to complain about your attitude. Elena feels her stomach drop. He said what? He claimed that some officer called the house asking about your adjustment issues and wondering if the family had any insights about helping you succeed. Sophia's voice is tight with anger. Elena, that's not true, is it? Sophia, no commanding officer would ever call a soldier's family about performance issues. That's not how the military works. And my evaluations have been exceptional. Elena documents this conversation too, along with screenshots of text messages where Miguel repeats similar fabricated stories. She realizes that Victor isn't just dismissing her achievements. He's actively creating false narratives about failures that never happened. The turning point comes when Elena is awarded the Meritorious Service Medal for developing a new intelligence protocol that's being implemented across multiple theaters of operation. It's a significant honor for a junior officer, typically reserved for those demonstrating exceptional leadership and innovation. Elena's commanding officer tells her the medal recognizes performance that significantly impacts military operations and reflects great credit upon yourself and the United States Army. Elena carefully documents everything. The official citation, photos of the ceremony, the letter from the Pentagon acknowledging her innovative work, testimonials from fellow officers whose missions were improved by her protocols. She has the medal photographed professionally and saves digital copies of all paperwork. Then she calls home to share the news. That's nice, sweetheart, Carmen says, though Elena can hear the pride in her mother's voice. What does it mean exactly? Elena explains the significance of the award, how it recognizes exceptional service and innovation. When Carmen asks if she can tell Victor, Elena says yes, curious about his response. The next day, Sophia calls with the aftermath. Dad said the military hands out medals for everything now, like participation trophies. He told everyone it's probably for perfect attendance or something equally meaningless. Elena adds this to her documentation with a note about the actual requirements for the Meritorious Service Medal, typically awarded to fewer than 5% of officers at her level. She also documents the irony. While Victor dismisses her medal as a participation trophy, his own company's awards wall is filled with certificates for Contractor of the Month and safety participation recognitions. Elena's file grows to include letters from soldiers whose lives were improved by her work, emails from Allied intelligence officers praising her collaboration, and documentation of the classified operations where her analysis proved crucial. She keeps records of the advanced training courses she's completed, the leadership positions she's earned, and the increasingly complex responsibilities she's been given. But perhaps most importantly, Elena documents the transformation in herself. She saves journal entries describing how military service has developed her confidence, leadership abilities, and sense of purpose. She keeps photos that show her evolution from the uncertain young woman at commissioning to the competent officer she's become. One evening, organizing her documentation, Elena realizes she's built more than just a file. She's created an undeniable record of excellence that directly contradicts every negative thing Victor has said about her military career. Where he sees weakness, the evidence shows strength. Where he claims failure, the record shows success. Where he insists she's playing soldier, the documentation proves she's become an exceptional officer. Elena doesn't know when or how she'll use this evidence, but she knows it will matter eventually. Truth has a way of surfacing, and when it does, Elena will be ready with facts instead of emotions, documentation instead of arguments. The girl who once desperately sought her father's approval has become a woman who methodically builds her own case for why that approval was never necessary in the first place. Elena's life changes the day Colonel Sarah Hayes walks into the Joint Intelligence Briefing Room. At 45, Colonel Hayes carries herself with the quiet confidence of someone who's earned every piece of rank on her collar through exceptional performance rather than politics. She's the new commanding officer for Elena's unit, and within 20 minutes of their first interaction, Elena realizes she's met someone who sees the world differently than her family ever has. The moment comes during Elena's first briefing to Colonel Hayes about emerging threat patterns in their area of operations. Elena has prepared meticulously, knowing that first impressions with new commanders can define an entire tour. As she presents her analysis, complex, thorough, and backed by weeks of careful research, she watches Colonel Hayes's face for any sign of judgment or dismissal. Instead, Colonel Hayes asks the kind of probing questions that reveal deep understanding and genuine interest. When Elena explains how she identified a previously undetected communication pattern among hostile forces, Colonel Hayes leans forward. "Captain Martinez, how long did this analysis take you?" "Approximately 6 weeks of off-duty research, ma'am. I wanted to be thorough." Colonel Hayes studies Elena with the sharp gaze of someone who recognizes talent. "And you did this independently? No one asked you to dig this deep?" "No, ma'am. I just noticed something that seemed worth investigating." After the briefing, Colonel Hayes asks Elena to remain behind. Elena braces herself for criticism. Perhaps she overstepped. Perhaps she should have stayed in her lane. Perhaps she was showing off. These are the messages she's internalized from years of Victor's commentary about knowing your place. Instead, Colonel Hayes says something that changes everything. "Captain, in 15 years of command, I've rarely seen such intuitive intelligence work combined with methodical analysis. Your ability to identify patterns others miss, that's not something we can teach. That's exceptional natural ability enhanced by dedicated effort." Elena feels something inside her chest that she hasn't experienced in years. Recognition from someone whose opinion carries weight. "Thank you, ma'am. I want to ask you something and I need an honest answer." Colonel Hayes continues. "Who in your life has told you that this level of insight and dedication is extraordinary?" Elena pauses, thinking. "My previous commanding officers have been supportive, ma'am. But before the military, family, teachers, mentors who recognize what you were capable of." The silence stretches between them, and Elena realizes she can't answer because no one ever had. Her grandfather saw her potential for service, but Victor's voice had always been louder, more insistent, more definitionally certain about Elena's limitations. Colonel Hayes nods as if Elena's silence tells her everything she needs to know. "Captain Martinez, I've seen this before. Sometimes the people closest to us are the least qualified to judge our capabilities. They know who we were at 8 years old or 16 or 22. They struggle to see who we've become." Over the following weeks, Colonel Hayes becomes more than Elena's commanding officer. She becomes a mentor who understands both Elena's professional potential and her personal struggles. During their weekly one-on-ones, Colonel Hayes shares stories about other exceptional officers who face family skepticism. "I had a lieutenant colonel who was told by his father that military service was for people who couldn't handle real careers." Colonel Hayes tells Elena one afternoon. "That officer went on to design counterterrorism protocols that are still used today. His father never understood what his son accomplished, but that didn't make the accomplishment less significant." Colonel Hayes teaches Elena something revolutionary. That respect from the right people matters infinitely more than approval from the wrong ones. She shows Elena that competence speaks louder than criticism, that professional excellence can provide the validation that family approval never could. "Captain Martinez," Colonel Hayes says during one of their meetings, "I'm recommending you for advanced intelligence training and putting you on the fast track for promotion to major. Your analytical capabilities are remarkable, but more importantly, you have something that can't be taught, the ability to stay calm and think clearly when everyone else is panicking. That's not weakness. That's the rarest kind of strength." For the first time in her adult life, Elena has found someone who sees her clearly. Not as Victor's disappointing daughter or the family member who chose wrong, but as Captain Elena Martinez, exceptional officer with unlimited potential. Under Colonel Hayes' mentorship, Elena discovers that the person her father claimed she could never become is exactly who she already is. Elena's confrontation with her father doesn't happen in a screaming match or dramatic showdown. Instead, it unfolds over a series of phone calls where Elena simply stops participating in Victor's narrative about her life. The shift begins during a Sunday evening call home. Victor, as usual, opens with his standard criticism disguised as concern. "So Elena, when are you going to get serious about your future? This military thing was fine as an adventure, but you're 28 now. Time to think about building something real." For years, Elena would have defended herself, explained her responsibilities, tried to make Victor understand the importance of her work. Instead, she responds with calm professionalism. "Dad, I've been promoted to captain ahead of schedule, and I'm being considered for a position with Joint Chiefs oversight." Victor doesn't miss a beat. "That's just military politics, Elena. They promote everyone eventually. What are you actually accomplishing? What are you building that will matter in 10 years? The old Elena would have argued, would have tried to explain the significance of her intelligence work, would have sought his approval. The new Elena simply states facts. "I've developed threat assessment protocols that are being implemented across 3 theaters of operation. I briefed Pentagon leadership last month on emerging security patterns." Elena, anyone can brief people. That's not the same as creating value. Victor's voice carries that familiar edge of condescension. "You're 30 years old and you're still essentially an employee following orders." "Dad, I have to go. I have a briefing with Pentagon leadership in an hour." "See? That's exactly what I mean. You're always running off to some meeting that." Elena hangs up. It's not dramatic. There's no shouting, no threats, no emotional outburst. Elena simply stops engaging with Victor's version of reality. When he calls back an hour later, Elena doesn't answer. When he leaves a voicemail complaining about her attitude, Elena deletes it without listening to the entire message. The pattern continues over several months. When Victor calls to criticize her wasted potential, Elena responds with achievements. "I'm implementing a new intelligence sharing protocol with NATO allies." When he dismisses this as bureaucratic nonsense, Elena says, "I need to go prepare for a classified briefing." Elena stops defending herself because she realizes that Victor isn't interested in understanding her work. He's invested in maintaining his narrative that she's failed. Every conversation is a performance where Victor plays the wise father trying to guide his misguided daughter back to reality. The final moment comes when Elena sends Victor a single text message with a photo attached. Herself in dress uniform receiving the Joint Service Commendation Medal from a 2-star general, with a simple caption, "Recognized for exceptional performance in developing counterintelligence strategies that enhanced multinational security operations." No explanation. No plea for recognition. No attempt to convince him of anything. Just documentation of reality. Victor responds within minutes. "Glad to see you're collecting participation trophies. Call me when you're ready to discuss real career opportunities." Elena reads the message, screenshots it for her documentation file, and blocks his number. The confrontation isn't Elena winning an argument. It's Elena refusing to participate in an argument that was never really about her performance in the first place. Victor wanted validation of his worldview where military service is lesser than business success. Elena's refusal to provide that validation is more powerful than any defense she could have mounted. She doesn't need to prove Victor wrong. She just needs to stop letting him define what success looks like. The shift begins with a local newspaper article that Elena never expected to see. The headline reads, "Local Army officer develops revolutionary intelligence protocol," accompanied by Elena's official military photo in dress uniform. The article details how Captain Elena Martinez created an innovative threat assessment system that's being adopted by military installations worldwide, describing her as one of the youngest officers ever to brief Joint Chiefs of Staff on strategic intelligence matters. Carmen discovers the article first, finding it shared in a local Facebook group by a neighbor who recognizes Elena's name. Within hours, Carmen has printed copies and is showing them to anyone who will listen. The woman who spent years quietly enduring Victor's dismissive comments about their daughter's government job suddenly has undeniable proof of Elena's extraordinary achievements. The ripple effect is immediate and devastating to Victor's carefully constructed narrative. His poker buddies start asking why he never mentioned his daughter's prestigious position. Business associates who heard years of complaints about Elena's poor choices are now seeing her photographed with military leadership and described as an exceptional young officer whose innovations are enhancing national security. At Miguel's construction site, workers who remember Victor's jokes about Elena playing soldier pass around the newspaper on their phones. "Boss, your sister is kind of a big deal," one of the crew tells Miguel, showing him the article's description of Elena's work with NATO allies and Pentagon leadership. Sophia calls Elena immediately. "Have you seen the article?" Mom is absolutely beside herself with pride. She's carrying copies in her purse and showing them to cashiers at the grocery store. But the most significant shift happens at Victor's office. His secretary mentions seeing Elena's photo in the paper, praising her accomplishments. His biggest client, a retired Air Force colonel, calls specifically to congratulate Victor on having such an accomplished daughter. "You must be incredibly proud," the colonel says. "Officers who brief the Joint Chiefs at her age are truly exceptional. She's representing your family at the highest levels of military leadership." Victor finds himself in the impossible position of either acknowledging Elena's achievements or revealing to important clients that he's been dismissing his daughter's remarkable career for years. The narrative he's controlled so completely begins crumbling under public scrutiny. The final blow comes when Carmen starts responding to Victor's old criticisms with facts from the article. When he complains about Elena avoiding family responsibilities, Carmen counters, "She's briefing generals about national security. I think that's a pretty important responsibility." When he mentions her government paycheck, Carmen responds, "The article says she's being considered for promotion to major ahead of schedule. That doesn't happen to failures, Victor." For the first time, Victor's version of Elena's story is being challenged by external validation he can't control or dismiss. The community's perception has shifted dramatically. Elena is no longer Victor's disappointing daughter, but rather the accomplished officer whose father somehow failed to recognize her exceptional capabilities. 3 months after the newspaper article changes everything, Elena receives an assignment that feels like cosmic justice. As the newly promoted Major Martinez, she's tasked with overseeing a ceremony honoring civilian contractors who supported military operations overseas. Reviewing the honoree list, Elena's breath catches on a familiar name. Victor Martinez, Martinez Construction Company. The irony is breathtaking. Victor's company provided infrastructure support during Operation Secure Foundation, a deployment where Elena served as lead intelligence coordinator. Her father will receive recognition for work that indirectly supported operations she commanded. Elena has 2 choices: arrange for another officer to present the awards, or do her job with complete professionalism. She chooses professionalism. On ceremony day, Victor arrives in his best Navy suit, clearly nervous and out of his element among military personnel. When he sees the program listing Major Elena Martinez as the presenting officer, his face goes through a series of expressions: surprise, confusion, and something that might be recognition. Standing in the base auditorium, Elena realizes this moment represents everything she's become. The scared young woman who desperately needed her father's validation has transformed into Major Elena Martinez, distinguished officer who measures success by her own standards. Every challenge Victor put her through actually strengthened her resolve. His dismissiveness taught her to seek validation from achievements rather than approval. His public humiliation taught her to stay calm under pressure. His refusal to understand her choices taught her to trust her own judgment. As Elena reviews her dress uniform in the mirror before the ceremony, ribbons and medals representing years of distinguished service, the gold oak leaves of her new rank gleaming on her shoulders, she understands that her military career isn't what she chose instead of success. It is her success. When Victor's name is called, he approaches the stage with hesitant steps. Elena stands at attention, holding the Civilian Service Award, while her father, the man who said she'd never amount to anything, waits for her recognition. "Mr. Martinez," Elena says, her voice steady and professional, "in recognition of your company's infrastructure support during Operation Secure Foundation, the United States Army presents you with this Civilian Service Award." The tables have completely turned. Elena holds all the power now, not through revenge or anger, but through competence and professional excellence. As she pins the medal to Victor's jacket, she sees something in his eyes she's never seen before. Respect mixed with the dawning realization that his daughter has become someone extraordinary. Elena has reclaimed not just her narrative, but her identity. She's no longer Victor's disappointing daughter. She's Major Elena Martinez, and that title was earned through her own merit, dedication, and strength. When Elena pins the Civilian Service Medal on Victor's jacket, she feels no anger, no satisfaction from his obvious discomfort, no desire to reference their painful history. Instead, she performs her duty with the same steady professionalism she brings to every task. "Mr. Martinez, in recognition of your company's infrastructure support during Operation Secure Foundation, the United States Army presents you with this Civilian Service Award," Elena says, her voice clear and respectful. She shakes his hand, looks him directly in the eye, noting how his hands tremble slightly, and moves on to the next recipient without pause or commentary. Elena doesn't need Victor to apologize or acknowledge his mistakes, because his opinion no longer shapes her self-worth. She has found validation in her work, respect from her peers, and pride in her achievements. The moment isn't about winning or losing. It's about Elena being exactly who she worked to become: confident, competent, and completely independent of his approval. After the ceremony, during the reception, Elena approaches Victor near the refreshment table. He's standing alone, still processing what just happened, the medal gleaming on his suit jacket. Other recipients are taking photos with family members, but Victor is isolated in his confusion. "Dad," Elena says quietly, extending a small wrapped package. "This belonged to Abuelo Roberto. He would have wanted you to have it after today." Victor's hands are still trembling as he unwraps the package. Inside is Abuelo Roberto's Korean War Service Medal, the Purple Heart that Elena has carried through every deployment, the medal Victor always dismissed as meaningless military nostalgia. Elena kept it as a reminder of what real service meant, but now she's returning it to the family with new context attached. "I don't understand," Victor whispers, staring at his father's medal. "He earned this protecting people who couldn't protect themselves," Elena explains simply. "Today you were recognized for supporting people who do the same thing." He would have been proud of that connection. Elena doesn't wait for his response. She doesn't explain the irony of him dismissing military service while being honored for supporting it. She doesn't point out that he spent years mocking the very values that earned him recognition. Instead, she walks away, leaving Victor holding his father's Purple Heart while wearing his own Civilian Service Award. The symbolic exchange is complete. Elena has returned her grandfather's legacy while establishing her own. She has honored the military tradition Victor spent years denying while demonstrating the grace and dignity that real strength requires. The closure doesn't need words or explanations, just the quiet recognition of what service really means, passed from one generation to another through a granddaughter who understood its value when her father could not. In the weeks following the ceremony, something shifts in the Martinez family dynamic, though it happens quietly, without fanfare or dramatic declarations. Carmen begins showing Victor the articles she's been collecting about Elena's military achievements, not just the local newspaper piece, but military publications featuring Elena's intelligence innovations, NATO bulletins praising her cross-cultural coordination work, and Pentagon press releases mentioning her strategic contributions. "Look at this," Carmen says one evening, showing Victor a Defense Journal article titled, "Young Leaders Reshaping Military Intelligence." Elena's photo appears alongside 3 other officers, all described as exceptional performers whose innovations are enhancing national security capabilities. Carmen's voice carries a quiet pride that Victor can't dismiss. "This is what our daughter does, Victor. This is who she's become." Victor doesn't apologize, that's not his way. But he stops making dismissive comments about Elena's government job. When business associates ask about his children, he begins including Elena's rank and position alongside Miguel's role in the company and Sophia's medical practice. The change is subtle but unmistakable. Elena transforms from the family disappointment into the daughter who serves at the Pentagon. Miguel calls Elena one evening, his voice carrying a tone she's never heard from him before, something approaching awe. "Elena, I looked up your military record after the ceremony. I had no idea. The stuff you've accomplished. It's actually incredible. I'm sorry I never understood what you were doing." Sophia's response is more direct. "I've been proud of you all along, but now I finally understand how remarkable your career really is. Dad's been showing people that article about your NATO work." He doesn't say much, but I can tell something's changed. The recognition comes slowly and without Victor ever admitting he was wrong. There are no tearful family reconciliations or dramatic apologies. Instead, there's a gradual acknowledgement that Elena has built something extraordinary, something that exists entirely outside the family's expectations or approval. But Elena's story doesn't end with family recognition because her identity is no longer shaped by being Victor's daughter or Miguel's sister. She has become Major Elena Martinez, and that title represents a life built on her own terms, measured by her own standards, surrounded by people who understand and value her contributions. Elena continues to serve with distinction, recently selected for a coveted position in strategic intelligence planning that will likely lead to lieutenant colonel by age 35. She mentors young officers who face their own family challenges, showing them that sometimes the greatest victory is simply becoming exactly who you were meant to be, regardless of who understands or approves. In quiet moments, Elena thinks about the trembling in Victor's hands during the ceremony. Not just nervousness, but the physical manifestation of a man realizing that his daughter had become someone he never saw coming. That recognition matters less to Elena now than it once would have, because she has found her tribe among fellow officers who measure success by service, dedication, and competence, rather than compliance with family expectations. Elena's path forward is clear. She will continue building a legacy of excellence in military service, not to prove anything to her father, but because she has discovered that this is who she was always meant to be. The scared young woman who once desperately needed Victor's approval has become a confident leader who creates her own validation through meaningful work and authentic relationships. Her grandfather's definition of strength, protecting what matters, even when it costs you something, has become Elena's guiding principle. She protects national security through her intelligence work, protects fellow officers through her mentorship, and protects her own integrity by staying true to values that transcend family politics. Elena walks forward into a future where she measures success by her own standards, surrounded by people who see her clearly and value her contributions. She has found that sometimes the greatest strength doesn't announce itself loudly. It simply serves quietly, builds steadily, and stands so tall that eventually, everyone else has to look up to see it. Real strength doesn't always scream for recognition. Sometimes it serves with quiet dignity, builds excellence through dedication, and ultimately stands so tall that everyone, even those who once dismissed it, has to look up to see it.